So now for the last chapter of our discussion, Shank Bits. Let's start with the vocabulary so we know what we're looking at.
We'll start with vocabulary. Quite simply, the shanks and the mouthpiece of a bridle bit this is the crux of this discussion. I'll try to keep it as simple as I can. In terms of vocabulary, for definition of shank, we have, like we did with the snaffle, two basic styles. We have the loose jaw, which allows the shank to pivot independently from the mouthpiece, and we have a fixed shank or solid shank, which is solid. The basic difference between one and the other, as far as function is concerned, when we allow lateral pull or riding one with two hands, this particular bridle bit allows us to distinguish between the right side of our horse and the left side. With a solid shank bridle bit, obviously when we pull on one shank, because it is solid and fixed, we pull on both shanks at the same time. Therefore, in terms of selection, it takes a broker individual to ride them with a solid shank bridle bit than it does with a loose jaw.
Great. Take me down through just the pieces.
Nomenclature: from the butt of the mouthpiece to the top ring or the headstall ring, this portion of the shank is called either the lift or the purchase, depending on where you're from. From the butt of the mouthpiece down is the shank of the bridle bit. As we go along, and all of us know that there are hundreds of different styles of shanks, I'm going to try to describe the difference between the basic differences and what we need to look for when we talk about balance and weight distribution.
Before we go there, one key word I've heard you talk about before is signal. How does signal relate to the shank of a bit? What does it mean as we continue our conversation?
Once again, signal is the delayed time from the time we start to move our hand and pick up or take the slack out of the rein to the time that it actually comes tight or has contact with the shank.
Great.
Okay? So as we talk about signal, tendishly, the loose-jawed bridle bit, because it is looser, is going to put a certain amount of delay or more signal than the solid shank bridle bit. Now we get down to the interesting part of these shanks, and it's weight distribution and ratio differences from lift to shank. One of the most misconceived items, if in fact we leave the ratio or the distance from the butt of the mouthpiece to the bottom ring the same and make the lift or purchase from the butt of the mouthpiece up longer, we actually diminish the effect of the leverage of the shank. What it does, however, allow us, the farther up the chin we go with the curb strap because of the lift or taller top, we're farther up on the jawbone where the jawbone is thicker and less sensitive. It allows us to physically position the front of the face from the pole to the bottom of the nose. If we shorten the ratio from the butt of the mouthpiece to the top ring and remain constant from the butt of the mouthpiece down, we increase the severity, we increase the signal, we decrease the signal time.
Because it's actually the opposite. More
Yes.
signal means it takes more time
Takes
for
longer.
your point to get through that bit.
We shorten this top, we'll have less delay in time. The curb strap will react quicker and act more vice-like because we have more ratio below the butt of the mouthpiece.
Mm-hmm.
Do you understand that part? Because this is crucially important for the function of the shank. Okay?
Yep. Let's talk a little bit about materials, weight, diameter.
All right, back once again to signal, weight, mass, and distribution. When we look at the chart, the area of the shank that we're concerned with is from the butt of the mouthpiece to that bottom ring. There are several things that we can achieve if we want to make it more severe and make the signal more intense. We add weight in any portion of this shank behind the center line to the point of pull.
Can you change weight by changing material and design of the shank?
Very easily in both. Yes to the answer to your question. We have two very similar. If we superimpose one shank over the other shank, wrong shank. We have the same point. The ring is the same height from the butt of the mouthpiece up, or the purchase. From the butt of the mouthpiece down, we also have the same amount of shank. This distribution, because we have more mass behind center line on the solid shank, we're going to intensify that signal or make this bridle bit more severe than the straighter, more direct pull from the butt of the mouthpiece to the ring. If we want to decrease further the effect of the shank from the butt of the mouthpiece down, if we angle the shank farther back and put the point of pull farther behind this imaginary line, it will also slow the reaction of the bit down. It will interfere less with natural head position.
So now we're talking about balance, correct?
Balance is always determined at the point of articulation where it crosses the mouthpiece.
And mass has a lot to do with
the
that.
interdential space, yes. Now, the farther this shank swings forward, obviously if we put more angle from the butt of the mouthpiece to the bottom of the ring, if this angle is more radical and comes back, we're going to have more reaction from the curb strap quicker. But at the same time, because of the displacement of that ring, the overbalance is going to be more exaggerated. In answer to your question, does it affect balance? The angle of the bottom part of that shank, yes.
Great. So define for me what overbalance is again?
Overbalance is when you release rein tension. If the shank swings forward, that's overbalance. If it doesn't swing forward, if it remains straight or behind this center line,
The vertical,
it's underbalance.
Got it. So if I've got this right, your overbalance allows for chin release of your curb strap, and your underbalance doesn't.
Doesn't. You always have constant curb pressure with an underbalanced bridle. An overbalanced bridle, and it is always determined at the point of rotation or articulation where it crosses the interdental space.
Great.
Okay?
Now before we get into mouthpieces, what's your final thought or something for me to think about or riders watching this to think about as far as shank selection?
Shank selection and the amount of severity. We have weight, we have ratios, how much above to how much below. We actually can take something very similar to this bridle bit. If we want to decrease the severity, we decrease the ratio from the butt of the mouthpiece down, and the shorter shank obviously has less effect or is less severe. It's slower, it's milder, less severe.
Great. Let's dive into our mouthpieces and the vocabulary that goes with that.
All right, we'll start let's swap over to mouthpieces. We're going to do vocabulary first so we're all on the same page and understand what we're talking about. Where a mouthpiece attaches to the shank is the butt of the mouthpiece. The space from the butt of the mouthpiece to this portion that extends above or below the bar is called the bar space. Anything that protrudes above or below the bar is considered the port of the bridle bit.
Great.
You comfortable with that?
Yes.
Okay. Once again, let's go back.
So many variations in the port and material that you can use to make this up.
Once again, height of port, or that point from the bottom of the bar to the apex of the port, we need, on the average individual, 2 inches of elevation to have palate pressure. When we think about our areas or points of pressure, roof of the mouth is palate pressure. We have the tongue, we have the interdental space, and we have the curb strap space.
So if you have less than that 2-inch standard, you're actually looking at tongue pressure, chin pressure, and interdental space pressure.
Exactly.
You're not dealing with palate at that point.
No. Okay? The other part of that, no, and we won't confuse that. We're going to go back and talk about severity, size of bar stock. Milder is bigger stock until we get to 5/8 of an inch. Anything in excess of 5/8 of an inch in diameter is considered massive enough that we increase the severity and increase the intensity of the signal.
Is this an example of that?
Wonderful example, that's a 3/4 inch bar with a normal port. A close second or a comparison to this, we have 3/8 stock with about the same height port and a nice smooth entrance coming into the port where it crosses the interdental space.
Okay. So that's an example of weight adding a lot of severity without changing many other areas in there. Okay. We've talked a lot about salvation and keeping a horse's jaw relaxed. What are some tools you use to do that with a curb bit?
We can augment a mouthpiece with rollers, frothers or danglers that hang off the port. This is a roller. Danglers actually hang lower than the bars of the mouthpiece on the tongue to initiate tongue movement. Both of those things create salivation. As the mandible relaxes, of course, salivation is more natural. The combination of materials, back to the same old thing. If we have a rusty material, mild steel, sweet iron, with the combination of copper, we can enhance or exaggerate salivation to a point.
What other variations do you want to touch on with curb or shank bits?
Once again, let's go back and reiterate a little on the mouthpieces and the effect of mouthpieces and what, when we look at our skeleton, there is a big part of this. Our concern, we have, let's take 2 radical differences. Where the bar meets the port in this mouthpiece, it's very square in this area right here. In our diagram, we've drawn a line. The more we slope this and the more gradual we go from the bar space into the port, the milder it is. If we make it overly wide, we actually saddle the interdental space, this one being right at the outside lateral edges. If it's wider than that, obviously it's going to let that mouthpiece drop farther down on the mandible.
Which you're saying decreases severity.
It has
What's the trade-off?
It has 2 basic effects. It allows the shank to hang deeper on the mandible and the point of articulation to become slower. So, number 1, it has more signal. And number two, for a greener or less experienced horse, it's easier to control that front of the face because it's not so immediate.
Let's talk about the other pressure points. You touched a little bit on the interdential space in the bars. Can we talk more about chin pressure and how that tongue, now we talked about anatomy earlier, how does that tongue come into play now that we've put a bit in there with leverage?
Obviously, the more opening you have in a port, the more relaxed or movement or natural movement you have for the tongue. The other part of that depends on the structure or the conformation of the mandible. If there's a big opening from the interdental space to the bottom of the mandible, the tongue will fit nicely in there, and we don't have to be quite so concerned as to the amount of pressure that we're going to put on it. Because of configuration of ports, we go back to a frog mouthpiece, and you'll notice that it's at the opening closer together than it is at the width of the port. When we lay that over the interdental space, it's on the inside of it. The physical reaction for this is that a tongue will actually pass down through that port, and we put pressure on the underside lateral edges of the tongue. Curb strap combination with these things, if in fact we have a port that applies palate pressure, we go back to the cathedral. If we need the tongue relief and we really don't want to have the palate pressure, if we tighten our curb strap, it will not allow the shank to articulate enough for the apex or the upper part of that port to push on the palate. So once again, head stall adjustment, curb strap adjustment are going to affect the outcome of the pressure points that we affect with mouthpieces.
Got it.